I challenge you as a believer, let that power get out.
Blind people received their sight. People have been carried in. We're healed. Nobody touched them. Nobody laid a hand on them. We just praised the Lord and spoke the word of faith, and God began to heal the people.
Here's a fish.
Yeah, let's go!
Oh my gosh, he's a pig.
He landed inside.
He kept me from the skunk. Look how massive this is.
The Casting Faith Podcast.
Push on.
All right, man. Good to be back. This is the Casting Faith Podcast. Some of this might get cut. We're going to see how this flows in.
Or we could just leave it.
Or we could leave it. Excited to be here this morning with you. Okay, so today I found this story, thought it was funny, and wanted to share it with you. Okay, so imagine driving down, we've all drive, you got a pretty long commute, don't you?
Yeah, it's 1 hour.
1 hour, that's terrible. Mine's 30 minutes, roughly.
I don't drive for most of it.
Yeah, your robot car.
Yeah.
Nice little auto.
Thank you, Elon.
I don't trust it. But anyways, we all have commutes, and some of you listening right now are probably on your commute. But imagine you're driving right now, and there's a semi-truck in front of you, right? And all of a sudden, a semi-truck tips over. And, as you know, semi-trucks carry cargo, carry whatever. Well, in Nebraska, early morning, there was a massive truck packed with crates of energy drinks. It was just cruising down the road, minding its own business. And then imagine being the person behind this truck, just driving on your commute, listening to this podcast probably. And all of a sudden, the semi-truck in front of you flips over. And out of nowhere, suddenly, thousands of energy drink cans start spilling out the back of the tractor trailer.
Oh my goodness.
All across the road. Talking hundreds, maybe thousands of cans rolling across the highway. Like a neon wave of delicious energy drink. Wouldn't that be crazy?
Hey, are you stopping? Are you going to pick some up?
So there's like a moral thing there, right?
Yeah, there's a law.
There's a law. We talked about laws. Cans are flying everywhere. The road is completely blocked off, and traffic gets backed up. I'm sure people were thinking that, though, like, this is my opportunity to grab a month's supply of C4 or Monster or Ghost or whatever you drink. But it's not every day that a highway gets blocked off by a truck full of energy drinks.
All right, so imagine the ants that are flying around now.
Oh, yeah, like supercharged. Just like
ants are eating all the,
man,
drinking all of it. All kinds of critters.
I bet you there were people that got out of their car and grabbed as much as they could grab. Probably grabbed as much as they could. What do you think?
Probably.
Would you?
No.
I think it's still against. I think it would still be considered. It's still theft because insurance claims and stuff like that.
It's like if money flies out the back of a car, like one of those bank safe, whatever those vehicles are.
I think,
like the armored bank cars or whatever. If those like roll over and money flies out, you can't just go take that.
It's not free
thing.
Just because it falls out of a semi-truck. But this guy, imagine driving behind that, and all of a sudden, just cans of energy drinks are smacking into your window, and you're pulling off to the side.
Yeah.
And I guess it took forever for this to get cleaned up. Just waves of sticky energy drink all over the road. And in a split second, your day goes from totally normal to complete chaos. And so, that got me thinking that sometimes life is just like that. But that person behind the truck was safe. Everybody was safe. And I'm sure, he's grateful that he didn't, get ended by a truck full of energy drinks. If you're not careful and you drink too many, that might be a bad thing. But,
Yeah, we just got off of a weekend that we did drink too many, and it was a bad thing.
Definitely. Yeah. But the point is that sometimes life throws you a curveball, but you still feel value in the lesson that you learned, even though something unexpected happens. I think of that story and think, man, that could have been really bad. Could have been really bad. But also, like, not every day you see a bunch of energy drinks flying out the thing.
Yeah.
And some people thought, this was a blessing in disguise. I'm just grabbing it, you know. But what would you have done in that situation? Would you be the guy trying to like autopilot your Tesla around the mess? Would you stop to check the driver? What would you have done in that situation?
I definitely would have stopped and checked on the driver. Like, I think anybody would. Any wreck that you've ever seen, like, there's usually at least somebody that's going to stop. And
Yeah.
it'd be pretty rare probably to see, like, just a massive wreck happen and just people drive by and look at it.
That would be crazy, you know. Be thankful, like, yeah, I would definitely, I think I would too. I think I would check on the driver. I would not grab the energy drinks. I would not stuff my trunk full of Ghost energy drinks or whatever it was. But sometimes life, in 1 minute where everything's going fine, everything seems normal, everything is going the way you planned. We wake up in the morning, we turn the light switch on, and we expect there to be electric, right?
Yeah.
And we get up and we put our key in the ignition, or if you have a push start robot car like you.
Yeah,
you
I don't start it at all.
You just think it.
Just get in and go.
Your Neuralink thoughts will turn on your. I'm just kidding. But you just expect it to work out.
It's like
right?
Avatar. I just plug my tail into it.
I don't like. That was the most uncomfortable scene of the movie was that scene. Like, what is this tail locking scene? Like, it just felt, and I didn't like it. Also, that movie is Ferngully. If you've ever seen, if you grew up, if you're old, no one knows what Ferngully is.
I don't know what Ferngully is.
It's the same plot.
Heard of it, though.
It's a cartoon. It's the same plot as Avatar. but anyways, you just go through life expecting things just to turn on and work. And so every once in a while, though, something will come along and kind of derail that thought process. And so I think that being people of faith, we have to be able to navigate those moments and try to see the lesson in those moments, right?
Yeah.
Because the Bible says that it rains on the just and the unjust, right? And so just because we're believers, just because we are faith-filled people, it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. Bad things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Good things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. That's just the nature of life.
Right.
And so sometimes things just pop up that you weren't expecting, and you have to maneuver and deal with that. And so finding value in the mess is what I wanted to talk about today. Just finding value in the mess. And so what do you think, Sean? Have you ever had a truck spill moment in your life? Have you ever had one of those times where everything just turned upside down and you're left trying to figure it out?
Yeah. So when I was 18, my life literally flipped upside down because I got launched off of a four-wheeler. So, yeah, I guess some of this, I will need to give a little bit of a backstory to this. And this is kind of like my main testimony of healing, that what God brought me from. I come from Parkersburg, West Virginia. I grew up in the Parkersburg Church. It's now called Christian Life Center. And it used to be called Apostolic United Pentecostal Church of Parkersburg. And that was J.C. Cole and Billy Cole built that church. And I was raised in that church. My dad and my uncle were both ministers, licensed UPCI ministers. And my uncle was a pastor in a church in Salem. And they did ministry under J.C. Cole and Jack Cunningham. And growing up, that's all I knew was the church life. And, my fondest memories was, like VBS and Sunday school and youth group as I got older, and the retreats and congresses and all that. But the most important lesson that I learned as a youth was to serve. And my assistant pastor at that church, taught me to just serve in everything. So basically he's kind of forcing me, but as a student, you kind of need that push. Mm-hmm. That'd be kind of like comparable to, we do Give Back Thursday. So it's kind of like that. But I was there like every day. Was it in my youth, and I'd go wash the pastor's car. Like the assistant pastor would be like, "Hey, here's the keys to the pastor's car. Go wash it." So
Bold.
well,
Bold.
yeah. So
Let's see how that plays out.
yeah, don't wreck it. So I would, just from pulling weeds to washing the pastor's car, just to changing the church sign, like the old school sign where you have to put the letters in. That was miserable. So that's what I knew. And eventually I became more independent as I grew up. In my later senior high years, started working, becoming less available throughout the week, which ultimately, long story short, led me down a path of making bad decisions. And one of those decisions was like 2 months after my 18th birthday, which is like May 2007 or so, because I'm really old. I applied for a credit card. Mistake number one. Bad decision number one, especially as an 18-year-old. Got approved for a credit card at a Suzuki store. I think it's still around. One of my friends' dads owned it. It was Lemon and Barrett's in Parkersburg. And my buddy was the one that actually signed me up for the credit. So that was no good. So I got approved for like $7,000 or something like that. And I was 18 years old. What does an 18-year-old need $7,000 for at the four-wheeler store? It's bad. So I ended up buying a four-wheeler, and I mean, thankfully, I guess it wasn't the most expensive one, because that one went faster. I had a 2007 Suzuki Z400, and I didn't even know how to drive it.
Really? I don't even know I don't know if I've ever, I think I can count on one hand the times I've ridden a four-wheeler.
Yeah.
Some of them are kind of like automatic. Some are different. So
yeah, so this was a manual. So
okay.
Yeah, I didn't know how to drive that. And I just kind of learned after I bought it.
Mistake number 2.
Yeah. So I brought the four-wheeler home and got it back to my dad's house, and we lived on my grandma's 20-acre farm. And I unloaded it, started plugging away at learning how to ride it. And after a few days, I got pretty good, like quote unquote, my confidence was building, and it was a false confidence. It wasn't that I actually knew what I was doing. And I rode that thing probably every day for like 4 months or so. Like, I was riding down the old country roads, single lane back roads on a ridge of a mountain, like passing cars on a one-way around blind corners. If you're from West Virginia, you know anything about those kinds of roads, like that's not the place to go 70 miles an hour on a four-wheeler passing people around blind turns. But I lived through it. I just grew up just having fun, like pinning that throttle down. It was like 5th gear, as fast as I could go, and very confident in what I could do on that four-wheeler. I felt like I was in control. Like every single thing about that four-wheeler, I knew what was going on with that machine. And I drove it from town all the way to town and on back roads in Work County, West Virginia. So the confidence that I had was what was bad. I'd barely been riding this four-wheeler. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I just felt so confident. And to be very clear, my parents were extremely against me having a four-wheeler. And I heard about that every day. So on Wednesday of a youth service, my buddies and I made plans to go riding following church on Sunday. Between services, we had night service. So we made plans between services on Sunday to go ride in Cutler, Ohio, is where we were going to go ride. And I knew my parents wouldn't allow me to do that, so I told my dad on Saturday that there was someone at church that was interested in buying my four-wheeler, and I was able to lie and sneak to get my four-wheeler into town. And we lived out in the country, so I put my four-wheeler in my truck, brought it to church, knowing full well that we were getting ready to go ride, and my dad thought that I was going to sell it, which was not the case. So mistake 3, lying to my parents. after service on that Sunday, October 21st, 2007, a date that I'll never forget. Buddies and I, we went to a gas station, filled up our four-wheelers, headed out to Cutler, Ohio, and we arrived and began unloading our four-wheelers, and actually ended up dropping mine off the side of the truck. I had a step-side Ford Ranger, and I had to lift it up over the wheel well and put it on, like, the wheels on the side of the bed and pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it dropped and fell out. So that was like the start of the day, like red flag. But we finally got them unloaded, and the property that we were at, he's like, we started riding and I didn't have a helmet. So he made us put on our helmets. Yeah, we took off. We took off riding. We were ripping, like driving pretty recklessly. And
You had your helmet on, though?
yeah,
Okay.
we were driving pretty recklessly. We rode for about 2 hours. And all of this is stuff that I've been told, because I don't actually remember any of this. We rode for about 2 hours, and we were about to head back to the trucks. And we were booking it through this field, headed into the woods and up a wooded hill, like trees and stuff like that. Going up a wooded hill. And I passed my buddy that was on a dirt bike, and the other buddy was well ahead of us on another four-wheeler. And when I reached the top of that hill, I was in third gear, which is like equivalent to like 40 miles an hour, 30 to 40 miles an hour.
Which that doesn't seem so fast, like in a car, but like on a four-wheeler or on a bicycle or something like that. That's some speed.
On a four-wheeler in the woods.
Yeah, like you
At 40.
put yourself in that mindset of being.
It's pretty reckless.
Crazy. That's so anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So as soon as I crested that hill, I noticed it started going downhill, and it went into a creek, and my buddy was stopped on his four-wheeler in the creek. And I guess this just spooked me, and I immediately stomped on my back brakes, which is like on your foot, like your right foot. And I was sliding, so I just reached for my front brakes and locked those up. And so I was sliding in a panic, grabbed the front brakes, and immediately that sent me over the four-wheeler, end over end, flipping down the hill. And I was sliding on my stomach. Remember, I was going like 30 or 40 miles an hour. And so now I'm flipping over the hill, sliding on my stomach down the hill, and the quad was bouncing behind me, headed right for me. And it finally caught up with me and gently rolled over my back. And it didn't do much harm, is what I've been told. Like, they've seen that happen before. Like, it just kind of like just rolled like over top of my back. However, as we kept going down the hill, the quad caught a tree root, and the four-wheeler flipped up in the air while we're going down the hill. And unfortunately, I was directly underneath of it. It was pointing straight down, like the front grab bar of the four-wheeler, and it came down right on my back. And it was lights out. That was it. So, I don't know. Like I said, I don't remember any of this. Everything is just an account of the two guys that were with me. The four-wheeler did its damage right there when that came down and hit me. My buddies were just trying to keep me alive. They said I was coming in and out of consciousness, and we ended up landing like near the creek or in the creek, and they just splashed water on my face. Actually, the guy that was splashing water on my face was the curly hair redhead that was playing golf with us at the golf outing this year. So he came up and played with us. I call him my lifesaver. I owe him a lot. So yeah, the four-wheeler came down and broke all my ribs. When it hit me, every single rib was broke. And when that happened, it was just like a grenade, as you can imagine, like just every rib crushing inward. My ribs just became knives to my organs. And it cut my aorta from the bottom of my heart, cut my pancreas, my spleen, both of my lungs, both of my kidneys, and just destroyed my inner organs. Damn. Externally, it's crazy. I only had a small cut on my back and a small cut on my left heel from the peg hitting my heel and not wearing riding boots. But internally, I was bleeding out fast. And I was quickly losing consciousness, and yeah, that's when my friends started splashing water and stuff on my face, and they called 911, and one of them headed back to the farmhouse to meet the paramedics when they got there. They ended up having to drive their pickup truck like 3/4 of a mile into the woods because the ambulance couldn't get to me. So long story short, they got me out in the truck, transported me to hospital like 30 minutes away in Parkersburg. It's now WVU Medicine in Parkersburg, but it was like Camden Clark Memorial. And that was 30 minutes. My parents were called at that time, and my dad and stepmom, they met me in the hospital. Like I do remember coming out of it for a second. And I remember seeing my dad as I was coming into the hospital. I didn't know what happened, really. However, I must have known something was up because when I saw my dad, all I could say was, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Dad." Because I knew I'd lied to him. Like the whole thing to get to where I'm at was a lie. I told him I was going to sell my four-wheeler. So the hospital in Parkersburg, they were unable to do anything. They couldn't handle that trauma. And they were forced to life flight me to CAMC in Charleston. And before the helicopter arrived, my heart stopped beating a couple times and I had to be revived. Finally got me stable enough to get on the flight. And yet again, I coded again, and that was mid-flight. And so I had to be revived again. Landed in Charleston and got into surgery immediately, where yet again, my heart stopped beating. And of all the things that the surgeons did, one of them is called an emergency thoracotomy. And the factual data from the National Library of Medicine shows that the survival rate for blunt force trauma emergency thoracotomy is 1.4%. That means I had a 98.6% chance of dying. And factually, only 98.6% of patients that have gone through that blunt force trauma emergency thoracotomy did die. Yeah, so that's tough. And after many hours of surgery, the doctors were surprised that I was still alive, number one. But knowing that information, they came out and told my dad and that they should prepare themselves because I wasn't going to make it through the night. And just imagine like what that pain is. Like the last time you saw your son, he was on a hospital bed just crying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry."
Man.
Like as a parent now, like I would just want to be like, it's okay. Like you don't have to say sorry. Like I realize you lied and you messed up, but I'm more worried about you. Anyways, I made it through the night, even though the doctors told my parents that I wasn't. And probably like 3 to 4 days after that surgery, I woke up on accident. I was in a medically induced coma.
What was that like? Do you recall
I don't know.
No. You weren't like, you didn't have like an out of body experience. Or
No,
like that.
no. It was like you go to sleep at night and you wake up and you have no idea what happened the past 8 hours.
Man. Okay. Yeah.
So I accidentally woke up from that medically induced coma like 3 to 4 days in. And I look over and I see my mom, who at the time lived in Sarasota in Florida. And so that scared the daylights out of me. I was confused. I was scared because it felt like I was in a dream, but it was real. I had no memory of anything that led to that moment, being in the hospital. I literally just woke up with my last memory being exactly 1 week prior to that wreck. So 11 days had passed without me knowing it. And suddenly my mom from Sarasota is sitting next to me. And mind you, like, to not be graphic, my stomach is still wide open. They have it covered with plastic, but they had to make sure all the bleeding was stopped. So I woke up and I'm wide open. Like my stomach is ripped open, literally. And so I was freaking out and my mom started panicking and yelling for a nurse. And that was my last memory. And,
Wow.
and then I woke up 2 weeks later. They brought me out of the coma.
So in the break, so like once you woke up on an accident and they came in after you panicked and they put you back under, do you remember anything from that time?
No.
But you remember the time you woke up?
Yeah. So I just remember that was probably like 30 seconds, but it felt like maybe 5 minutes. But yeah, so
what was
that's it.
What was the recovery process like for that?
So I spent a total of 54 days in the hospital. It was about 2 weeks in the medically induced coma. And then I was NPO, which is like no food, no water, or no liquids. And
no energy drinks?
No, nothing. That was another like week and a half probably, or 2 weeks. But I did have this awesome nurse. Like eventually as I like started becoming more myself again, like I'm still this goofball 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And this nurse would bring sweet tea to me. And I wasn't allowed to swallow it. That was the only rule. Like you can put it in your mouth and wash it around, but you have to spit it out through the tube, like the suction tube on the back of the bed. Yeah, and that was a long, it felt like forever being in there for 54 days, but especially not being allowed to eat or drink.
So did it feel like an endless journey, or were there moments of like, I'm going to be good, I have hope that I'm going to get out of this?
I never felt like I was in anything. I never felt any pain. I don't have any memory of pain or frustration or any of those feelings that you would think would come along with that trauma, because my brain had done its job. Like it blanked out the trauma.
Yeah.
And that did cause, I had a seizure in the hospital from all the trauma-induced like issues. And today I still take that seizure medicine because of that 4-wheeler wreck. So that's the only long-term medical condition that came from that, was just I have to take seizure medicine, and it's just part of it. And I see a neurologist once a year.
So you say a lot of that was just from a perspective of people telling you what happened.
Yep, all of it.
Did you ever feel the accident happen, like the initial feeling?
No.
You don't remember anything?
No, I actually can tell you the exact memory that I have before that, and it was taking a picture with a girl I had a crush on like a week before, like the Sunday prior to that Sunday.
Did she visit you?
No, I had a girlfriend.
Oh.
And yeah, I had some people that were they were there for me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of people would come to the hospital and stayed and visited. I hear stories about it was like a big party out in the waiting room. Like I was in ICU and they were just out there partying. That's what I hear. Like I wish I could have been there. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a lot of people were there for me and visited me all the time, and just never felt really lonely. Just a couple nights I remember my mom just needed to go home.
Yeah.
Well, she lived in Florida. She needed to go back to her aunt's house. That's where she was staying, I believe. And she just needed a break from the hospital, as any parent would.
Yeah.
But
were there any like breakthrough moments during your recovery? So you say you didn't feel like any of the pain. You don't remember any of the pain, but you remember the recovery process, like the physical therapy, all that stuff.
Yeah. I remember having to climb stairs.
Yeah.
And I was probably like 185 pounds or 180 like ish. I'm 6'2", like 180, 185 at that when I wrecked. And I got down to like 120 or something like that. So I didn't have any muscle. So
that was a painful process though, like the therapy.
It was frustrating. It wasn't painful. It was just frustrating that I could barely walk up the steps. Like that was like what is happening with
to relearn how to do everything.
It's not that I had to relearn it. I just didn't have the strength to. It's like you're trying to lift weights and you're doing your like max rep and
on that light switch and it's just like stuttering.
Yeah, it's like what is happening? Yeah. Yeah. And so I would try to get out of that physical therapy. And at the time I was still on Dilaudid. It's like the highest pain med, I think, probably that you could get in the hospitals. And so I would purposely tell the nurses like, hey, I'm in pain, knowing like an hour from now, the physical therapist is going to show up. And if I take Dilaudid, I won't be here for it. Which I did have pain. I wasn't abusing the system. I just knew how to time it, so I didn't have to do physical therapy.
Right. So you hear a lot about mental health after physical trauma. Most times when somebody goes through an accident or any kind of physical trauma, there's some mental things behind that comes up. Were there any moments where you questioned if you were ever going to have like a full recovery or not?
No, I'm not really built like that. I'm like always super positive.
Built different.
And not that, like, I'm just like, I'm never really negative, and I just love life kind of like feel.
Now, did you have that perspective before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it never went away. I was just like, this is fun. Like, I don't have to go to work or like, I'm just hanging out in a hospital.
It's like the least fun thing for me. Just to be like,
But after the hospital, it was a little frustrating because I wasn't allowed to work for a year medically. So I had to live with my dad, and which I was before, but I just couldn't go anywhere. And we lived really far away. We lived out in the woods, like in the country, Work County. My church was in Parkersburg, so it was like 30, 40-minute drive.
Yeah.
And my cousin is a nurse, and she would come over and give me my shots, like all the shots I needed, like, and I just couldn't go anywhere, and it was terrible. So I wanted to go hang out with my friend. Like, I'm 18, it's like the funnest time of your life, like,
yeah.
And I missed a lot. And my other cousin Justin would come and pick me up for church and stuff like that, which is way out of their way. And yeah, that was like really frustrating.
Yeah.
And
kind of feeling stuck.
Yeah. And then I moved to Charleston. In that time, just some things happened, and I worked under the table at a hot dog shop and lived with some friends. And yeah, that's when I moved to Charleston and started going to Pastor Anthony Moss's church, Billy Cole's church, really.
Yeah.
He was the bishop at the time.
So so that's an incredible story that you survived. Number one, God gave you the latitude and mercy to still be here with us. On the lessons learned, and I guess the perspective gained from that experience, what did the accident teach you about life? Or just the way you approach everyday situations now? Do you feel like, for example, do you find yourself taking more risks or being more cautious?
I don't think that I am more cautious necessarily, but I guess the biggest thing is being honest with those around you and be ready to submit to a no. And because if I would have been honest with my parents, with my dad, and said, hey, I'm going to go ride 4-wheelers, he would have said no. So that would have saved my life.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have taken that no. So there's 2 steps to that. Like, I got to be honest, number 1. And number 2, I got to be ready to submit to a no when it's against my will, And that would have saved my life.
So how did you come to the realization that lying to your parents about riding the 4-wheeler was kind of connected to this accident? Did you feel like a sense of guilt or responsibility after?
Not really. I was like carefree in probably to my demise. Like, yeah, no, I didn't realize that until I got older.
Yeah. So do you think God had a purpose for you going through this traumatic event? And in what ways has this changed your understanding of how you view struggles and those hard turns in life?
So I know the answer to that one already, because it's been many, many years since that happened. I believe that I went through that because my son was going to be born. I believe that my son is a world changer, and that my purpose is to raise my son is how I feel. Like, I'm sure like God's got plans to use me, but I don't see myself like that. I think my purpose was to raise a godly son that, is going to change the world someday. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why God spared my life, for a bigger purpose, I guess.
That's awesome. What would you say to someone going through something similar? Maybe there's somebody listening that is in that dark, life-changing moment right now, where they're maybe recovering or in that season of life where it just seems kind of hopeless. How can they find hope in God in that moment? How can they find God through those moments? Like, is there any practical advice?
Yeah, sometimes you just got to go through it. And when you come out on the other side, that's when revelation will hit. And I don't think a lot of times when you're in those dark places, you really see what God's going to do. And yeah, I think it's just something that if you're in that dark place, just know that it'll end. It's just a season, and it will come to an end. And eventually you will see the purpose that God has for you to go through that event and whatever.
Looking back, are there moments or lessons that you see that God was working in your life that you couldn't have understood during that time? Like, obviously 2020, you wouldn't have lied and took the four-wheeler, but do you think there's like any lessons in that experience that you can look back on now?
Yeah, I think the lesson really is just, maybe it's geared more towards young people. Just listen to your parents. And it directly correlates to growing older and submitting to a pastor. You know, I know we've talked that a lot, but that's really like the root of all of this lesson, besides like what God had planned for me in the future and how I believe it for my son. Besides all of that, I think the main lesson to take from my testimony is submission. It's pretty simple, like, and being prepared to say no. It could save your life. You don't know what you're being protected from, whether it's your pastor, your parents. You don't know best.
Right.
Somebody from an outside perspective does.
Yeah. And I think too, like with this podcast, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to have people on who know more about us in different aspects and different things. I think it's just important for growth to be able to listen to somebody who has wisdom, and to be able to submit, maybe not like every aspect of your life to just anybody, but knowing the role of following somebody's guidance in your life. I think that's important for growth. I think if you just do things out of your own will all the time, and you do whatever you think is best all the time, that's like a recipe for becoming stagnant in your growth. You're just going to stay where you've always been. You're not going to grow as a person if you can't listen to advice. And on a spiritual level, you need a pastor that can speak into your life and that you can be submitted to. And if you're a young person listening, your parents are that built-in role for you too. No matter what, the Bible talks about respecting your parents, respecting that role, because it's their job to watch over you. It's their job to provide for you and protect you. And they do, the term is mother knows best. They do know what's best for you in most cases. And so I think it's just important that we learn how to take those roles seriously in our life. Obviously, this story was a personal testimony for you, and an experience that you went through that caused a lot of suffering in your life, but it ultimately led to growth.
Yeah.
It ultimately formed you into the right person that you're supposed to be.
And I'll say, if none of this happened, I probably would be in a very bad place. Like I was headed down a path that didn't lead to where I'm at now, like, to say the least. Was I faithful at church? Absolutely. Was I doing the right things all the time? No. And, those small things, those small decisions of missing church and getting less involved could lead to your demise, like, spiritually. So
you feel like that
I definitely wouldn't be where I'm at today if that didn't happen.
You feel like this experience was kind of a way for God to redirect your course?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? I think it's not funny, but I think that sometimes, this is kind of a deep thought, but sometimes I think suffering is necessary for growth.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to, we've all heard the whole, once you become a Christian, it's not all rainbows and butterflies, but like the Bible does say it rains on the just and the unjust. But also, I feel like there's times in our life where we're going to go through things just to put us through a process that helps us become what God wants us to be. And whether that's a four-wheeler accident or a semi-truck tipping over, an energy drink's hitting your car, whatever it may be, you may go through some things in life that you will never understand. And that's okay. The important thing is to stay faithful to God in those moments and ask, where's the lesson in this? God, what we need to stop asking why we go through things and just ask, what are you trying to teach me in this moment?
I've heard so many preachers say, stop being mad at God for your problems and start thanking him for it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because he's trying to teach you something.
Thank you for another lesson.
Yeah, he's showing you something through that thing that you're going through, though it's frustrating that there's thousands of energy drinks spilled out on the highway floor in front of you and your commute just got cut short. God just spared that man from something, like it could have been a whole lot worse. Or maybe God is just trying to put a pause on the moment that you're in so he can show you a lesson and teach you something to get you back on the track for the perfect will of God for your life. I think it's part of life. Sometimes you go through things that aren't explainable, that you don't understand. In your case, you were defiant to your parent, and it was it's like a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Like the lessons that you could derive from that testimony that are endless.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot there, and it's very clear. Like, had I not done this would not have happened. But God sees the big picture. And he doesn't just see where we're at now, but he sees where he wants us to be, where we could be, where we could end up, and what are those little tiny decisions that you were talking about that lead up to a big thing, what each of those decisions leads us towards. And so because he sees his ways are higher than our ways and his views are different than our views, he sees what needs to happen in our life to make sure that we get on the right path.
Yeah.
And so if you're praying for the perfect will of God in your life, and even if you're just trying to live the will of God for your life, there's going to be moments in your life where suffering is eventually going to happen. It's necessary. And I believe it's in order to cause spiritual growth. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to have to go through terrible seasons all the time. That's not what I mean. But God sometimes puts circumstances in our life to put us right back on the right track or to teach us a lesson. And in my case, most of those times in my life was so that I was able to help somebody else down the line that went through something similar.
Yeah.
And that I could point them to what helped me through it, which is ultimately God.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you go through things in life just to help somebody through that same thing, because God knows that you can handle it. Mm-hmm. And God knows that you're going to be a tool in his hands to witness to somebody else. You probably heard a lot of people say everything happens for a reason. And we know that the Bible says that too, that all things work together for the good of those who believe in the Lord. And so how do we interpret that phrase into the context of this accident and recovery? We just kind of talked about that a lot.
So all things work together for the good.
But maybe not always your good.
No, definitely not. Yeah. But for the kingdom. Yeah. The kingdom of God is benefited through my trials, through my lessons, through this four-wheeler wreck. Like God positioned me where I am today. And without that wreck, who knows where I'd be. But because all things work together for the good, mm-hmm. God had to position me to a place, not only like physically, geographically, but mentally and spiritually, and for his good.
Yeah. Romans 8:28 is the scripture that we're referencing here, and it says this. It says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Mm-hmm. And so it's not just if you love the Lord, but you're called according to his purpose. And sometimes, because you're called to his purpose, you're going to have to go through things to fulfill that purpose.
Yeah.
This verse highlights the idea that God can bring good from even the most difficult situations. And this can resonate with everybody who's ever gone through anything. especially this traumatic experience.
Yeah.
Another verse that I thought would be good to share with our listeners is this. Isaiah 55:8-9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declareth the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This is a reminder that God's plan often doesn't make immediate sense, especially in the midst of suffering or unexpected hardships, but there's always a bigger purpose.
Mm-hmm.
When life throws you those curveballs, when you go through things in life that don't exactly make sense to you in that moment, when the semi truck full of energy drinks spills over on the highway to wherever you're going, just know that God sees a bigger picture and he has a plan for you.
Yep. And your plans that you think you know, like for me in that going back to that four-wheeler wreck when I was 18, my plans were I was going to WVU in Parkersburg, and I didn't even have a major. I was just going to go because that's where my friends were at. And so I had no real like vision for my life. I had no purpose really. And a lot of people get stuck in that culture, like in West Virginia, in Parkersburg specifically, because it's where I was born and raised. I always say like people get stuck and they can't get out of West Virginia, out of Parkersburg. Nothing against the state. I love my home state, but I see like my brothers, they're doing really good now, but they were stuck in a place in their 20s, early 20s that, if you could just see outside of your own purpose and see what God can do for you and what else is out there. Like, but we as humans, we can't see past that. Like, that's why like submitting to God and his purposes, he knows where you're going to be thriving. He knows where you're going to be successful, and he'll put you in those places, and it'll bring glory to him, and it'll benefit you as well.
Yeah. I think that another scripture too to talk about would be James 1, verse 2 and 4. It says, "Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." It's not God's desire for us to stay stuck, but you go through circumstances and you go through these turns and twists so that God can put you on the right path, and so that he can teach you perseverance, and so that you can complete his purpose for your life. And so, like you said, in that circumstance with your brothers and with other people who find themselves stuck, if that's you, my advice would be to try and find a way to not have to go through terrible circumstance to give your life to God.
K-Shock just said this. Go up higher.
Yeah.
Go up higher. Look at the view from up here.
Yeah. And the way to do that, the way to get a higher perspective, if you feel stuck in your like old hometown and everybody kind of just burns out and that's what they become, if you feel like you're in that stage of life, the way to go up higher is to humble yourself. You got to humble yourself, and you got to pray. You got to deny your flesh.
Yeah. You got to get low to get high.
Yeah. And so I think that this story and this episode is helpful to give clarity to people who maybe are going through rough situations right now, to know that there is a purpose for this. There's a purpose for what you're going through. And it's one, if for nothing else, it's so that God will receive glory through your testimony on the other side. And two, it's going to lead you to the purpose of God for your life. This is just part of the process. And so if you count it all as joy, like the Bible scripture, James 1 verses 2 and 4 say, "Consider it pure joy when you face these trials, because know that it's going to produce something great in your life." And so that's my hope for this episode today, is that you understand that when life throws you curveballs and life doesn't go the way you expect it to go, maybe you're going through a hard situation or trial, know that God is in it and he can work it together for your good, but also it's going to do something for the kingdom too. And so we have to count it as joy when we face trials. and find the lesson in those moments.
Yeah.
Like, comment, and subscribe